This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's episode, we are going to go over the entire box office history of the Spider-Man franchise at the movies. We're going to be skipping all those TV shows just to keep this reined in. And even then, we might speak a little bit about some of the spin-offs you might have seen in a theater near you. We're going to stick to the main franchise titles because there's a lot to go over as Spider-Man Brand New Day helps drive a record weekend at the domestic box office. In the second half of this episode, my colleague Chad Kennerk is going to be speaking with one night only director Will Gluck. The film is coming out in wide release this weekend, so don't forget to stick around for that interview right at the end. But now let's go to our main event here, guys, because there is a lot to go over, a lot of movies to cover, and a lot of memories, I think, in our movie going lives. Joining me once again today are Chad Kenner from Box Office Pro and our resident comic book expert, Diogo Hausen from the Box Office Company. Gentlemen, welcome back. I had a great time at the movies catching this last weekend, Spider-Man Brand New Day, I mean. But my Spider-Man movie history goes back to 2002 with the release of the original Sam Raimi title. And as I went over all of these films individually, it just reminded me of how much a part of my life these movies are in terms of movie going in my own experiences. I've seen all of them theatrically. I think I've seen all of them on opening weekend. Yeah, I mean, a lot to cover here in our own lives, but let's start with your own personal connections to this hero. Chad, on your end, you've mentioned it to me before. You're maybe not the biggest comic book guy, but when it comes to Spider-Man, he has a special place in your heart.
Yeah, definitely. I was a huge Spidey kid growing up, from the comic books to the 90s animated series and obviously all the films. I think I've read all of the Amazing Spider-Man issues from 1962, at least through the 90s, and maybe then sporadically thereafter.
That's
So
commitment. That's
he's
a lot
def-
of reading.
yeah, he's definitely the one that I resonated with the most.
And how about you, Diogo? Because if I look back to our high school days and to our listeners, Diogo and I played both soccer and football throughout high school in Miami, Florida. In our varsity soccer team, you somehow got away with wearing a Spider-Man shirt as your goalie jersey. And we went to like the state final four. We went pretty far with Spider-Man back there in goal for us.
It was an official jersey. It was like an actual goalkeeper jersey. What could I say? Someone slapped the Spider-Man logo on it, and I wasn't gonna not wear it. It was amazing. Yeah, no, I've been a huge Spider-Man fan since forever, as far as I can remember, and usually that included some form of cosplay on and off of the soccer pitch. Throughout college, many people knew me as the guy who would just show up to class in a Spider-Man costume if there was a movie coming out.
Yeah, that tracks. And if we go over the entire history of Spider-Man at the box office, we have to real quick go over the projects that didn't really make it to fruition. These rights had been bouncing around for a while. Golan and Globus, the two producers that were a part of Canon Films, had those rights for a hot minute. They tried to get something off the ground, I think, with Toby Hooper from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which would have been more of a body horror take on this. I don't think they really knew what Spider-Man was or cared, which is fine. And after Canon Films, Carolco tried to give it a go with James Cameron. There, I believe it was in the mid to late 80s, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, that project never really saw the light of day. And we really didn't get, I think, a serious contender for a Spider-Man film until the producer Avi Arad got involved with the project. Sony picked up the rights to Spider-Man. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Diogo, Sony was offered the film rights to the entire roster of the Marvel movies, and they said, "No, we're good with Spider-Man. We don't want any of the other chumps."
Oh, yeah, I'm just really bummed we didn't get James Cameron's pitch on X-Men as well that he originally tried to do. A Catherine Bigelow directed X-Men
Mm.
with Angela Bassett as Storm and Bob Hoskins as Wolverine. I I was just hoping for a Keanu Gambit someday.
Bob Hoskins Wolverine, that would have been a great career, playing both Mario and Wolverine, in a matter of years. We missed out on that, unfortunately, but I'm sure the
Yeah.
fanboys are happy that didn't happen. But yeah, we have to go now to the what, mid late 90s when Avi Arad gets involved in this. Sony in the picture, Amy Pascal joining the production team. And all of this adds up to the film that we know now, just simply titled Spider Man, which came out in May of 2002. A production that I think relied on special effects technology that had to be ahead of its time, both in terms of practical effects and CGI. And that's where the iconic John Dykstra comes in and develops a lot of that visual technology that makes Spider Man a reality on the big screen. A film that taps, let's say, an unlikely director in Sam Raimi from the Evil Dead trilogy to come in, a filmmaker probably better known as a horror director being tapped to take over a cast of indie film actors. You've got Toby Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, Willem Dafoe. I mean, a trio of leads that you would most likely see in a film playing at the Cannes Film Festival or the Sundance Film Festival instead of like a huge global blockbuster. But all in all, that 2002 film spawns, I think, the core trilogy that was such a big part of our lives. Let's start with our, let's say, initial memories of that first Spider-Man movie that came out in May 2002. Chad, do you remember where you were and where you saw it?
Yeah, yeah, it was kind of one of those hallmark theatrical experiences for me. I think I was a freshman in high school. No, I was a sophomore in high school. I saw it at a Regal. I remember having one of those moments during the movie where I was in a packed auditorium opening weekend and kind of remembering seeing everyone else's reactions and thinking like, "Wow, this is really cool. This is cool that we're all getting to experience this together." It felt like something that had never been done before, that I hadn't seen anything like that before. Spider-Man didn't feel like a superhero that was possible on the big screen until then. So, yeah, I remember the energy of that room and going back and seeing it more than once.
It was such a special moment, if I remember correctly, because you had obviously Superman and Batman, which I think our generation, and we're all roughly the same age. We were also in early high school when Diogo and I caught this down in Miami, Florida. But I remember this was a big occasion because I had seen Batman primarily on VHS. I'd seen Superman in VH, maybe even Betamax, to be honest. And then, of course, we had X-Men that had come in, what, like a year before, maybe 2 years before Spider-Man had come out. And I think we all loved X-Men. X-Men was that sort of movie
Yeah.
that came in on the heels of the TV show that we all grew up watching in the mid 90s. And then the big question is like, wow, can someone give Spider-Man the X-Men look, right? And X-Men, that Bryan Singer X-Men, I really can't stress that influence enough because it offered something that felt a lot more contemporary to, let's say, the fantastic world or maybe surrealist isn't the right word, but let's say hyper realism from Tim Burton's Batman movies and let's say maybe the romanticism of those Richard Donner Superman movies. That X-Men movie felt like we finally got something for our generation. And when Sam Raimi comes up with this movie, Diogo, like Chad, it felt like one of those unforgettable movie going experiences. Where were you, and where did you see this when it first came out?
Oh, I remember watching this in the Grove. I was wearing my in Miami, wearing my Finest Mark Echo Spider-Man shirt,
Yes,
and
this one should.
I was just transported. I just lived in that movie, and I became so obsessed with it. I remember doing math projects where, like, I was using Spider-Man to demonstrate geometry with action figures and sets that I built for it. I don't know if the math made any sense, but that movie ran my life.
It was that big, and I remember interviewing, Jeff and Jamie Benson, the owners of and founders of Synergy Entertainment, talking about their early days as exhibitors, really pioneering the dine-in cinema space back then. And they told me that really after 9/11, and 9/11 is very much in the backdrop of the success of Spider-Man, we'll go into that shortly. But after the drop off in box office grosses that happened after 9/11, there were big questions about the viability of the movie theater industry. Like there always seem to be, right? Every 5, 6 years. But this was this particular crisis in the early 2000s. And it wasn't until that May opening weekend for Sam Raimi's Spider Man where Jeff Benson told me that he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "We're exhibitors now. This is going to be, it's not something we're doing for a little bit. This is our career now. There's a long term viability here." And it was very much a movie alongside Bryan Singer's X Men that ushered in this era of the superhero franchise, right? It's really something that became much bigger than itself. Looking at how the movie came together, it's fascinating to see the directors that were considered to take on this project. Names like Ang Lee, who ended up making Hulk movie for Universal some years later. Roland Emmerich, who was probably best known for Independence Day, I think is fair to say back then. M. Night Shyamalan, who was the hot name coming off of The Sixth Sense. Tony Scott, who doesn't need any more of an introduction from there. And of course, David Fincher, who was in consideration, but it's hard for me to believe David Fincher, after the Alien 3 experience, was at all interested to go and tackle a movie like this. Ultimately, I do think Sam Raimi was the best choice. Probably not the choice I would have made if I was producing a movie like this. I didn't really link on how you go from those Evil Dead movies to something like Spider-Man, but he pulls it off. He pulls off a great origin story, an origin story probably as successful on the big screen as we'd seen with Richard Donner's Superman. And a big part of that success, I think, also comes down to the main actor. With your protagonist playing both Peter Parker and Spider-Man and Tobey Maguire, who beat out actors like Chris Klein, Scott Speedman, and Joe Manganiello for the role. I don't know if you guys have seen that screen test that Tobey Maguire did, shirtless, doing martial arts moves in what looks like a back alley, where he looks fantastic. Because
Yeah.
apparently there were some concerns that he might not have that physicality for the role. And if you go back to see Ang Lee's The Ice Storm, you would of course say the same thing. Hey, that kid can act, but can he fight? And I don't think there was any doubt after that leaked footage was first seen. Chad, from a performance perspective, what did you think of Tobey Maguire? Because of course he, maybe for our generation, is our Spider-Man.
Right. Right. Yeah, I feel like the reason why we love Spider-Man is because of Peter Parker, because of identifying with him as a regular guy and all the things he's dealing with, and I don't know if you get a better casting at that time in Hollywood than Tobey Maguire. I definitely resonated with him as a character. I just wanted to, yeah, step into those shoes. I thought he was perfect casting and emotionally, like, brought all of that resonance to the role, and like you said, was able to pull off all the fighting as well.
I think a big part of this is the fact that Amy Pascal and Avi Arad, along with Sam Raimi, cast the role for Peter Parker first rather than for
Mhm.
Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man, you're acting with something on your face. There's no skin showing at all, right? It's a very difficult performance. I know there's a skill set there. So a lot of that performance and connection for the audience is going to come down to the person portraying Peter Parker. And I agree with you. I think Tobey Maguire does it perfectly. At the heart of that is also his chemistry with Kirsten Dunst, who I think is fantastic here as Mary Jane Watson. Diogo, what did you think of not only Toby's performances in these movies, but that chemistry that he ends up building with Kirsten Dunst that ends up being the emotional core of that Raimi trilogy?
Oh, that's the main thing for all of these superhero movies for me. I talked about this before with Lois and Clark, Peter and MJ, and jumping ahead, like, it's the exact thing that I liked about the Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone movies. It's like they got the relationship and the romance down right, which is something I feel like is missing from a lot of superhero movies these days. So once they got the right Peter and the right MJ, and they actually have chemistry, everything else really fell into place.
I agree. And I think the The action sequences were, of course, technically tricky. As I mentioned, John Dykstra pulls it off with Sam Raimi. They all hold up, honestly. You can tell that they're shooting on a set.
Mhm.
That's fine. I mean, that's something about these Raimi movies that I don't love, where you can tell when there's, pickup shots of New York City and then they're somewhat awkwardly matched with the sets that they had, probably in LA back then. But other than that, I mean, the set pieces, the action looks so good today that you wouldn't really guess this is a movie that's, almost 30 years. It doesn't look like that, right? I mean, down to the Spider-Man suit design, which is something really hard to pull off. It's maybe something we take for granted. I think the costume design works really well. I will put in one exception because even back then in 2002, the one thing that stuck out like a sore thumb for me was that Green Goblin suit design. That Green Goblin looks terrible. He looks like a green Power Ranger. Maybe CGI wasn't there, wasn't ready for it, but you have Willem Dafoe and you just don't let him emote. You put him in that ridiculous costume. He looks awkward and it doesn't help an otherwise fantastic performance that this actor gives in the film. I don't know if you guys feel the same way about that.
I feel like that costume's a little more iconic than if we look at, Amazing Spider-Man 2 and that version of the
Mm.
Goblin.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They tried. They tried to make, like, animatronic face-moving mask that matches the comics. They have footage of it that you could see, but
Mm.
they decided, "No, let's go, like, it's supposed to be a military, operation suit thing. Let's go with that."
Can you
And
imagine someone in the armed forces wearing that ridiculous thing into battle? It's just like I mean, that whole thing doesn't really work at all here in this equation. You could just say, if you told me, "Hey, we were really inspired by 90s television and we wanted to have something that would sell to the army and then sell toys," that makes sense to me. But no, it doesn't look like military equipment, Diogo, at all. It looks ridiculous. But, ultimately, I think the rest of it works really well. And I think part of the success of these Raimi movies as we look at everything that came after, especially in contrast to what the DC extended universe in its era tried to do, which ended up being a lot more dark and brooding, or maybe the grounded take of the Batman trilogy from Chris Nolan, or what the Marvel Cinematic Universe tried to do in bringing a lot of sarcasm and irony into its screenplays. There's none of that in Raimi's trilogy. I think Raimi's trilogy, if anything, is overly earnest. It's a very sincere series of films. It so much asks you to take it at face value and doesn't act like it's too cool to be just a superhero movie and a movie that children are going to enjoy and older men are going to have, maybe some nostalgia with. And I do appreciate that. Of course, I think that starts to wear thin by the time we get to the third installment of Raimi's trilogy. But looking back at the original, really not much to complain about at all. I think it was highly successful based on what it was trying to do. And the box office numbers reflect that. It opened in May 2002 to $114 million opening weekend, ends up making around $400 million domestic and crosses the 800 million mark globally. It was the highest grossing movie of 2002, and it's the sort of thing that after you finish watching it, I remember walking out of, I believe I saw this at the AMC Sunset Place down in Miami, just thinking, "When can I see the next one? When are they gonna make Spider-Man 2?" And we can't forget, as I mentioned a little bit ago, just the influence of, I think, 9/11 in the culture when a movie like this comes out. I do think of Spider-Man as one of the first, if not the first, film that the audience reception is in communication or engages with the impact of the September 11th attacks. To have a film like this set where it was set, I don't know if it was at the forefront of everybody's minds, but it was probably in the back of your mind as you're watching this, even as a teenager, as part of a world you could make sense of, right? Part of a world you could understand after something that was, I think, was unimaginable for so much living through it. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. When I first saw it, I just thought, it looked cool. The action sequences looked great. That final fight between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, I think it's in Roosevelt Island at an abandoned hospital. That's where you can see Sam Raimi's horror chops really coming out. It looks great. And the Goblin's death scene right there, right at the end of the movie, I think just completely works. In terms of action sequences, this one, I think, really set a very high bar that, for the most part, a lot of the Spider-Man sequels, even the bad ones, live up to. I don't know, Diogo, how this shapes up for you in terms of action set pieces.
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, even rewatching it now, it's so hard hitting and intimate, and it works so well with the sound design and whenever they drop the score in it and just let you live in that moment. Yeah, it's at the bar. Yeah, they did such a great job with this movie, and it wasn't just like the beginning of, the Spider-Man franchise. We had the start of Kevin Feige working on this movie as a production executive for Marvel and seeing how to set the standards for a good superhero movie.
So very much an origin story, not only in the modern era of superhero movies, but an origin story for Kevin Feige, who ends up being, as you mentioned, an instrumental executive in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what we know as a superhero movie today. As we go on here to Spider-Man 2, I do want to give a huge shout out to the book With Great Power: How Spider-Man Conquered Hollywood During the Golden Age of Comic Book Blockbusters by Sean O'Connell. A lot of the behind the scenes stuff that you'll hear us talk about was pulled from this book. Sean was able to go in and interview a lot of the creatives involved in these movies. Highly, highly recommended, because a lot of what he brought in from his research on the making of Spider-Man 2 is fascinating. A movie that came out over July 4th weekend of 2004, so basically 2 years after the original. And if the first Spider-Man movie showed us how fun superhero movies could be, I think Spider-Man 2 showed us how good superhero movies could be. For many, many years, I think this was probably, I don't know how you guys feel, this is probably the best Spider-Man movie for, maybe a decade plus after release. Chad, where were you in the July 4th weekend of 2004, and where did you see this movie?
I think it was at the same Regal. Yeah, I think I was, yeah, because I was still in high school, so it would have been at that Regal, and I do remember just being blown away by it and how it brought a lot more of the threads that were kinda set up in the first one, but also a much more complex villain, right? I think this is the movie that Roger Ebert called the greatest superhero movie ever made, and at the
Yeah, and it
time, and I
tracks,
think
right? Because it was
yeah,
really
yeah,
good. Like, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, it's not hyperbole. I mean, for many, many years, it wasn't the best Spider-Man movie made. It was the best superhero movie made. I think probably up until The Dark Knight.
Yeah, honestly, I think it might still be the best Spider-Man movie. For me, I think this one still is holding up the cake of best Spider-Man movie. It's just like on a standalone level, like you can jump into it and not really need to know what happened in the first one. There's like a quick refresher just in the opening
Mhm.
credits with that like the beautiful art. I don't even remember where I saw this. I think I saw it. Did we see it together?
No, I
Was
didn't
it
see
in
it with
Sunset?
you.
Ah,
Did see it at the AMC Sunset Place. I
mm.
remember going to watch it after one of my high school plays, and, I
Oh,
were not in high school theater. We did sports together,
yeah.
not theater together. But no, I remember very distinctly going to see, Spider-Man 2, that summer of 2004. It still was, I think, one of the best movie-going experiences that I had in those high school days down in Miami. A movie that is able to raise the stakes, I think, in terms of character first and then action set pieces second, going back to why these movies work, right? I think what Raimi gets right is the Peter Parker character and the Mary Jane Watson character, their connection, and also who they are as individuals. I think the blueprint that Raimi follows in this sequel is very similar to what Richard Donner did in Superman 2, right? So I think, kind of like Superman 1 with Donner and Spider-Man 1 with Raimi, that's basically set up as an origin story, and you get a big adventure with a marquee villain. In part 2, there's a big part of Richard Donner's Superman 2 that is about Superman just getting a little bit burned out and wanting to give up the mantle of being Superman. Spider-Man 2 does the exact same thing. Peter Parker just gives up, throws away his costume, and that great callback of that comic book storyline from what was it, the 70s, 80s? I forget. You guys can correct me. But it was a great sort of movie where you had these moments of self doubt, and the relationship with the Mary Jane character played by Kirsten Dunst develops even further. I think that's what I remember first. What I remember second, again, is that the action set pieces are even better in Spider Man 2 than they were in Spider Man 1. The train set piece between Alfred Molina's Doctor Octopus and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, I think to this day is probably still the best action sequence in any of these movies, and I want one of you guys to disagree with me.
I can't. Did you say the train? That's
Yeah.
man, that's the
No,
first thing I
right?
think about when I hear Spider-Man 2. Immediate
Chad,
trains.
how did you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is one of the best, and I feel like all these movies kind of bring in like the New York as a community, and I think that's maybe the best use of that in one of the Spider-Man movies as well.
I will say again, as a pushback to Spider-Man 2, I think Doctor Octopus is the right villain. I think the villain design is fine. I am not this is sacrilegious. I'm not convinced that Alfred Molina, an amazing actor, was the best possible choice for Doctor Octopus.
You
I
think it should have
think
been Arnold?
oh, no.
James Cameron
I
style?
say
James Cameron wanted
no.
Arnold. Who's gonna
Really?
argue with Big
Ooh.
Jim? Yeah.
I would. No, Arnold would have been worse. I don't know if look, Alfred Molina wouldn't have been my first choice, and even after having seen this film, I think he's great in many other movies. I don't think this is his strongest work. I think he's kinda, like, awkwardly placed in this movie in a trilogy from Sam Raimi that prides itself in finding real actors and putting them in these fantastic settings. Chad, I don't know if that performance worked all the way for you or not.
I mean, yeah, I feel like it did. I don't know who else I would have at the time put in that role.
'Cause
Yeah.
it's tricky, right? It needs to be an older actor because
Mhm.
it's a scientist. But again, I think a lot of these characters are cast not as the villains, but as the people they are, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
right now you're not casting Alfred Molina as a guy that can pull off a fight sequence. You're casting him as someone that can pull off the dramatic moments in the film. So it makes sense in that. I'm just not completely sure about it. I say that even though I think when he comes back for Spider-Man No Way Home, I didn't have those issues. So maybe it's just performance oriented or something that still lingers from when I first saw that movie back in the AMC Sunset Place. Spider-Man 2 opening over 4th of July weekend in 2004 to an $88 million opening weekend, ends up topping out at 373 million domestic and 412 million overseas for a $786 million global haul. A little bit under the first one. So I think Sony saw those results, saw where things were going, and decided, hey, we have to go bigger and badder with Spider Man 3. And what we can say and confirm right now is Spider Man 3 is bigger and it is badder in the sense that it's worse. In, in fact, it might be the worst. Unfortunately, Spider Man 3 coming out 3 years later on May 7, 2007. Probably the worst of the bunch. It's so underwhelming and it's frustrating to say because Raimi did so much in getting these movies up and running. But Spider Man 3, in the world of installment derailing a franchise, I mean, that's what happened here. Ah, I don't know where to start. Let's start with Chad. I mean, where did you see it at this point? And were you as disappointed as I was when I first saw this?
Yeah, I definitely was disappointed. I probably saw it at that same Regal again. I was out of high school at that point, but it
This
was
is a
still
commercial to Chad's childhood Regal, by the way.
Yes,
A huge
yeah.
shout out.
Yes,
Nothing wrong with it.
Regal Coldwater Crossing. Saw a lot of films there. Yeah, I remember leaving thinking, "Gosh, there was a good movie in there somewhere, but there was so much stuff that didn't work for me."
It's
Yeah.
almost, Chad, like that is a problem that keeps on happening to Spider-Man sequels and ends up killing a lot of good superhero franchises, namely the
Mhm.
X-Men. Because what happened eventually to these X-Men movies that I think launched this new era of the superhero movie is they just start building and adding onto these things where it ends up being an ensemble movie, where instead of a good action set piece between two, three, four characters, you have to intercut between settings and locales. You don't know who's throwing a punch or why. And there's so many actors you have to give lines to that you rarely get
Mhm.
dramatic stakes established in any of these movies. Unfortunately, I think with Spider-Man 3, it tries to wrap up so many narrative threads and jam in so many villains that the film just collapses under its own weight. Diogo, where did you first see this and how did you feel when you first saw it? And how do you feel about it now?
I remember this being the second best movie-going experience of my life. I
And that's
saw it
the kindest thing anyone has ever said about Spider-Man 3. So thank you, Diogo.
Yeah, second only to the rowdy screening of Cats at the Alamo Drafthouse. I saw this at the AMC Mercado 20 in Santa Clara. I went to the midnight screening, like, the first moment it came out, and I went in, like, full Spider-Man cosplay, painted half of my Spider-Man costume black, so it was all, like, Venom melty, and there was other
Oh.
people dressed as the villains there, so we did, like, a whole photo shoot, and it was, like, my first time cosplaying with people at a cinema, and I was like, it's the best," and then the movie started.
And it all went downhill from there. But no, you bring the cosplaying aspect to it, which I love, by the way, and this
Yeah,
weekend when I went to go see Spider-Man: Brand New Day, that was a huge part of it. On opening weekend, seeing all the kids and adults dressed up, there were people all over New York City wearing Spider-Man shirts and hoodies. It's
that's
hot.
awesome.
It's unbelievably hot in New York City this weekend, by the way, and people were still wearing hoodies just because it had a Spider-Man logo on it. So I like this festive atmosphere around it, and it's become a part of the Spider-Man movie-going experience, and I'm glad you had that, as something you enjoyed. I will say, after watching it for the first time, back in 2007, and I remember I saw this while I was studying abroad in Spain at Cines Ideal, which is a Yermo Cines location, now a Cinépolis location, down in downtown Madrid, back by the Puerta del Sol. Wonderful, wonderful movie theater, one of the nicest movie theaters I've ever been to anywhere in the world. They play a lot of movies in their original track. So in Spain, at least at the time, it was kind of hard to find movies that weren't dubbed, and I wasn't about to watch something with Spanish accent Toby Maguire in it. Um, and I went and I thought, you know what? The effects are kind of good. This is a little bit goofy. I'm not sure how I feel about it, and it wasn't until maybe, like, 2, 3 weeks later that I'm like, "You know what? That wasn't any good." It didn't hit me immediately. It is one of those movies that just reeks of dysfunction because a lot of the core elements are there. Like Chad says, there's a good movie somewhere in there. There's just too much of too many different sequels within its running time, and I think the one mistake that a lot of fans, keep on citing as the film's fatal flaw is that you try to shoehorn the Venom storyline in there, when in reality, Sam Raimi has been public about this, going on record saying that he never really believed in the Venom character. The studio pushed him to do the Venom character, and what he wanted to do was a more self-contained story with closing that villain arc from James Franco's Green Goblin 2, or I don't know if that's a different Goblin. You'll have to correct me in a little bit. And the Sandman, which I think were two villains that really work in the story. Ultimately, I have to agree with him. Venom feels surplus to the film. I think you can get rid of him entirely. And of course, the jokey, goofy elements of emo, angsty Spider Man would probably get cut as a result of getting rid of the Venom storyline. Is that being unfair to this movie, or is the reality that there's no version of Spider Man 3 that would have worked? I don't know how you feel about it, Diogo.
I agree with you. I think Sam Raimi got this job because he showed how much he really loved Spider-Man. Like, he wasn't just, like, a big name director, he was the director who, like, really wanted to make this movie, and he loves those early Spider-Man villains. So, Venom being a later '90s villain, he, like, had no connection to him, he wasn't into it, and, reading the Great Power book and the, MCU reign of Marvel Studios, it's amazing to see how many decisions for Spider-Man were made based on toy sales. and Venom was a character that kids loved and wanted toys of, and Avi Arad really pushed to have that toy made, and I think that
Mm,
just derailed the whole movie.
I'll go one further. I'll even include the Sandman as a villain you probably didn't need, which would then give us a film with James Franco as the main villain, basically fulfilling his character arc in the trilogy, going back to the original in avenging his father's death as a Green Goblin. That might be too much Franco to handle. I don't know if audiences would have bought into that, but I say that because I think that the Sandman retcon in putting him in the origin story of Uncle Ben's death is completely unnecessary,
Yeah.
feels tacked on, and was I remember when I first saw it was the number one thing I didn't like about the movie. When I rewatched the film ahead of this podcast, it also stuck out as me as the first moment where I completely disconnected from the movie. So yes, by the time that Venom gets there and the time you get like emo Spider-Man, it's a little bit silly. It's hard to connect with it all the way, but the movie lost me with the retcon. That's where I dropped away. Chad,
Yeah.
I don't know how you felt about that moment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it kinda shoehorns that in. It like you said, there's just too much going on. There's too many characters. It tries to put in Gwen Stacy and Captain Stacy and that whole storyline.
Yeah, and I
That's
think
tough.
it's not just on the villain perspective, right? Because the emotional stakes are now divided in the James Franco storyline coming full circle, which I think is actually a very well developed storyline, probably the most coherent one in the entire film. Then you have the romantic rivalry with Bryce Dallas Howard's Gwen Stacy and Kirsten Dunst, Mary Jane Watson, which I don't think is very well fleshed out. I don't think it's very well developed. It does feel very tacked on. And then ultimately, you have the whole, evil, angry, angsty Spider-Man that doesn't work. And then the Sandman motivation of, I kind of want to see my kid. And also, I killed your uncle. And we're going to do retroactive gymnastics to sort of show you and prove that point. There's too many things going on a dramatic level for the script to really focus in and hone in on any dramatic stakes between two characters, which is something that the first two Spider-Man movies get absolutely right. Ultimately, however, Spider-Man 3 is not a disappointment at the box office, hitting new heights for the film at the global level after the highest opening weekend in franchise history with $151 million. It ends up making $336 million domestically, $549 million overseas for an $885 million global total. The box office was there. The audience, however, was getting off of the train at this point. And around this point, between 2007 and when we finally get the next iteration of the Spider Man franchise in 2012, those 5 years were, I think, a very difficult period for this franchise as an IP. I believe there might have been some efforts to get it back on TV, an animated series that didn't capture that magic of the mid 90s animated series that I think Diogo, Chad, and I grew up and loved as kids. It doesn't really establish itself in the culture. And there are other superhero movies that are now sprouting up and are taking people's imagination. And it feels like superhero movies are going one direction and Spider Man is still stalled where those first two Raimi movies were, and obviously the low mark of Spider-Man 3. And this is where I want to bring in maybe a little interlude to the depths where Spider-Man had fallen in terms of let's sell toys and let's sell t-shirts because it stopped being let's make a movie. It started feeling like let's make money. And there's nothing louder in this conversation than the argument of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark on Broadway that opened in 2011, which I can tell
Oh,
you as
yeah.
someone that saw the Julie Taymor original. Diogo and I were living in New York at the time. Diogo's dad came up, and in wonderful Diogo's dad fashion, buys I don't know how much your father spent on those tickets. We were one of the first people to ever see Julie Taymor's original, not the revised one. We saw the original Julie Taymor Spider-Man on Broadway. We were there, I think, what, 4.5 hours, Diogo, because of technical malfunctions? There were
Not long
people
enough.
dangling from the
Should have
sky.
been there
I mean,
longer.
Chad, this was a fiasco. I mean, an unforgettable Broadway experience for all the wrong reasons. I've never seen a dumpster fire in person like this, but I did on 42nd Street that night with Diogo and his dad. It's just shockingly bad. I mean, maybe one of the worst vanity projects you could ever conjure. When we talk about, movies derailing careers and franchises, has Julie Taymor recovered as a theater director from this? I mean, this is just a very expensive mistake, and Spider-Man turned into a punchline. By this point in 2011, we have this disaster on stage, ends up losing hundreds of millions of dollars for the Broadway producers. The last reference you have on screen is the very poorly received Spider-Man 3. Everything here is primed for a reboot, which we do get in 2012. But before that 2012 reboot under director Mark Webb, we did get, I think, at least the beginnings of an attempt on a Spider-Man 4 with Raimi. Doesn't exactly work out. I think he earmarks the Vulture as the villain he wants. There are rumors that Ben Kingsley was up for the role, that John Malkovich was up for the role. Eventually, we get a Spider-Man movie with a Vulture in it. We don't get Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4. I'm not sure there was anything left to save. I think that's how bad Spider-Man 3 was. And ultimately, as much as it pains me to say it, because we all love those Raimi movies, I think rebooting it was the right call. I think rebooting it so quickly was the wrong move. Chad, I don't know how
Yeah.
you felt about that decision at the time.
Yeah, it's a shame we didn't get a John Malkovich Vulture. If Spider-Man 3 had been even marginally better, I wonder where the franchise would have gone. I think the one thing about, yes, rebooting it is Sam Raimi did the origin so well that every time we come back to Spider-Man, we kind of like the reboot of the origin story, like, doesn't work so well, right? I really liked the Andrew Garfield casting and Emma Stone, like Diogo, you mentioned the chemistry there works well, and I think
Yeah.
that's what saves that movie, why we have a second one.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But in the background here on why it gets rebooted as well, let's not forget the influence that Christopher Nolan's reboot of Batman has in the American film industry. Because Batman Begins as a reboot comes in 2005 and impresses a lot of people. But it isn't until The Dark Knight comes in 2008 when you get a radically different superhero movie. And I think a new benchmark in terms of how good a superhero movie can be. And we go from, hey, do we really want this earnest take on Spider Man that the last iteration tanked in 2007? Maybe not financially, but definitely with audiences. Do we want to give that tone another shot, or maybe we go with this whole grounded thing and try to make it, shot on location and make it a little bit darker where characters die and there's all these more slightly more adult elements in there. And I can't help but think that those Nolan movies at that point, just those first two, had a really big influence in Sony eventually saying, you know what, those first three Spider-Man movies tonally aren't where we're headed.
There's definitely like a darker, grittier, like you gotta be cool edge to the Amazing Spider-Man. And like, you got Andrew Garfield like skateboarding around and he'll like stand up to bullies, which I actually enjoyed that. I was like, I ride a skateboard, I find that relatable. Um, so yeah, I feel the Andrew Garfield movies are underrated. There's a lot that I like in them, but I see the mistakes. And I agree with you that it was definitely too early for a reboot.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that work here in Mark Webb's movies. Not only this one, but in the sequel as well. Again, I think it was the right move, maybe at the wrong time. It was just 5 years between Spider Man 3 and The Amazing Spider Man. And as you mentioned, Chad, the biggest mistake that The Amazing Spider Man makes is trying to tell the same story we saw with Sam Raimi's Spider Man. And we discussed this when we went over the Superman box office history. The wrong way of doing it is trying to go one better on someone that's already established the origin story so well. And you're kind of stuck here when you're tackling a reboot. How do you reintroduce a character? I think by retreading the same ground that Sam Raimi had aced, Sam Raimi got 100% on that assignment. Even if you got a 99, it wouldn't have lived up to it. And you end up spending a good chunk of that running time, at least in the first half of Mark Webb's Amazing Spider Man, comparing the movie to Raimi's because there's a lot of the same story beats that happen. And that's a pity because visually, I loved what Mark Webb did with both his movies. He went out of his way to distinguish the visual style of his two Amazing Spider Man films to Sam Raimi's trilogy, down to the point where no one apparently from the crew of Sam Raimi's trilogy was invited back to work on Mark Webb's. Mark Webb wanted to create something entirely new, a different suit, a different webbing system, different movements. Andrew Garfield does, I think, a really good job as Spider Man. I mean, Amazing Spider Man gets so much right that you do sort of bemoan the story mistakes that are prevalent in the first installment and especially in the second installment. I think the casting and the chemistry between Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy and Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man is fantastic. I think it carries both movies, but the movie gets so distracted in either retelling a story we just saw and a story that was already well told, or tries to cram way too many franchise building moments, especially in the second one is the big sin of it, that again, you get that Spider-Man 3 effect of a movie collapsing under its own weight in trying to world build. That's where these movies go wrong. But I will retain that visual style that Mark Webb develops for both his Amazing Spider-Man films, and specifically how good these movies look in 3D. Because at the time when we get this movie in 2012, 3D is going through a huge boom, and none of the Raimi movies were presented in 3D. That digital 3D component, I think, is maximized in both the Mark Webb films, and you get that sort of GoPro first person camera in both those movies that I think work really, really, really well. That's what I take from those movies. But now unfortunately, we're going to have to start with the negatives because in The Amazing Spider Man, despite all this effort going in on rebuilding it, it ends up with a $62 million opening weekend over July 4th of 2012. That is less than half of the Spider-Man 3 opening weekend. It's a low point in the entire franchise. It tops out at 262 million domestic, 496 overseas for a $758 million global total, the lowest global total for any Spider-Man film to date. It's a pity because you saw just so many good decisions build up to this. Ultimately, it's a disappointment. And I would argue, and I don't have this data, but I would argue that, like a lot of folks, I want to see Spider Man 1 and Spider Man 2 at least twice in theaters. Spider Man 3, no one needs to see twice. I think, one was enough for all of us. But where I went wrong with Amazing Spider-Man is I appreciated a lot of those aspects, but the villain was just so dull with the lizard. It looked like baby Godzilla. It really took me out of the movie. I could never really fully engage with it. That after I finished watching it, I remember I saw this at the Regal Union Square here in New York City. I was done. I didn't feel I needed to go back, and I wasn't particularly excited to see a sequel the way I was after I saw the first Raimi Spider-Man. What was your reaction to this movie, Chad, and where were you when you first saw it?
I saw it at a Carmike Cinemas in IMAX, and I
Shout out to
remember.
Carmike, by the way. We're
Yeah,
Carmike
yeah,
forever crew over here. I love it.
yeah. I mean, I remember enjoying it, enjoying the reboot and feeling like it was doing some different things, some interesting things. I like the casting, but I agree with the CGI-ness of the villain takes you out, and it kinda, yeah, gets lost in that whole, yeah, CGI fights, which,
Yeah.
has been a big trap of superhero movies, and I think that's what makes Raimi's trilogy more interesting is there's a lot more tactileness to
Yeah.
those movies that helps them hold up.
Even though you can see the set in Raimi's
Yeah.
movies, they feel like the punches are landing, whereas I
Mhm.
feel in Mark Webb's movies, even though the acrobatics are a lot more interesting in terms of, like, how Spider-Man moves, those punches feel like Marvel Cinematic Universe rubber punches, right? They feel like they bounce off of these characters. There's no real weight or physics to how these characters move, unfortunately. Now, I echo that. That really took me out. I think another big mistake here, guys, not only in retelling the origin story, but in including the Norman and Harry Osborn characters, if you know you're gonna go with a different villain, don't bring 2 characters back in that we already saw before. I think it was a really good idea not to retread ground with Mary Jane character, but go all in. Go all in and just leave the Osborns and Oscorp for later. Diogo, did you have better feelings about this when you first saw it, and where did you see it?
I was living in San Francisco at the time. I believe I saw it at what is now the AMC Kabuki. It was like the Sundance Kabuki before.
Mhm.
Um, and I was just, I'm always happy to see Spider-Man's and taking a darker, grittier take. There's so many comics that are like that that I really enjoyed this movie. At the time, I was hyped. I was like, "Why aren't people into this? What's the problem? This is Spider-Man." N n now I can see and be like, "Okay, yeah, there's some mistakes. I guess it is a little too soon for people, but I'm used to hearing a lot of retelling of comics kind of over and over, so it didn't really phase me that much."
Did you connect with the casting here? Because and I hate to focus so much on villain casting, but again, starting with Alfred Molina in Spider-Man 2, I wasn't really into. I think Topher Grace is a disaster in Spider-Man 3, and it's not his fault. He
Mhm.
should have never been in contention for that role. And I know what Raimi wanted to do. He wasn't interested in the Venom character, so he wanted to do Peter Parker parallel instead of having
Yeah.
a physical distinction between that character and Parker in Spider-Man 3. Didn't work at all. But I think outside of Stone and Garfield, the casting lets me down here. I don't know what Dennis
Yeah.
Leary's doing. I don't like, yikes. Nothing outside of the core 2 works here.
Yeah, Dane DeHaan doesn't really work for me as Harry either. There's there's really no one else in the movie that got me excited for it besides that just that core.
And I mean, Sally Field's always great, but I remember even at the time being a little bit of a disconnect, like not necessarily thinking of her as Aunt May.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with Uncle Ben and, like, the mumbly, like, not power, I'm not talking about power, I'm responsibility speech. Like, everything had to be convoluted and backwards. No, Mark Webb even, like, he didn't wanna do anything that looked like the comics, which Raimi really wanted to do. He wanted to, like,
Right.
recreate iconic imagery, and Mark Webb's like, "No, we're not doing that." It's like, "But."
Actually, in fact, Mark Webb is the only director of all these film adaptations that hasn't recreated these iconic comic panels in any of his films.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting decision. I'll come up with this. I don't know if it's a hot take. It's like what 15 years later after this movie came out. But my theory here is I think Mark Webb gets too distracted trying to deliver a movie that isn't a Sam Raimi movie that he doesn't put
Mhm.
enough attention in making his own. And you
That
get
makes sense.
glimpses of Mark Webb making his quote unquote own Spider-Man movie, but it feels like he's trying too hard for it to be different and doesn't really let the film breathe and really let the characters and actors breathe. In the movie, I think as Chad mentions, works best when it's just Garfield and Stone on screen. Once you add any other element or once they're not on the screen together, you start looking at your watch and it starts running a little bit long and it just doesn't work quite as well. I will give it, however, a big thumbs up on its use of New York City. I think in terms of a filmmaker that integrated New York City into the Spider-Man movies, by far the Mark Webb movies are the
Yeah.
best. But that's as good as we're gonna but that's as good as it gets here for the Mark Webb titles because once again, a Spider-Man sequel tries to do too much and derails the entire thing. That's exactly what happens with 2014's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, opening in May 2nd of that year to a $91 million opening weekend. So nice, performance there, but it fizzles out to a $202 million domestic haul, the lowest domestic total for any Spider-Man movie. 506 overseas and globally, once again, a new low point in the franchise, $709 million. And whereas creatively, you felt the Raimi movies had run their course and you needed a fresh start, here with Mark Webb movies, the box office told you that. Nothing else told you that. The box office told you that first. And after having seen the film, I mean, can you blame people? I don't know how much of a distance in being worse Spider-Man 3 is from the Amazing Spider-Man 2 is, but it's close, man. I mean, there's a lot here that doesn't work. Chad, where did you catch this and what were your original thoughts on it?
I think it would have been the same Carmack Cinemas, and yeah, I remember coming out of it being really disappointed. It does very much do a lot of the same things wrong that the Spider-Man 3 is guilty of, having so many different characters, and I mean, come on, I've always wanted to see a Felicia Hardy, that whole storyline in a Spider-Man
Ugh,
movie,
Right.
and they just have her kind of there as an Oscorp employee. Felicity Jones would have been a great Felicia Hardy.
yeah.
But there are so many moments like that where you introduce a character, but you don't really introduce them to advance the story. You introduce it as fan service at best.
Mm.
And at worst, you introduce it to set up a movie that hasn't been made yet. And there was
Right.
just so much circling around the Marvel Cinematic Universe playbook that Sony could apply to the Amazing Spider Man movies, where ultimately that's what sinks this one totally. It wasn't really a toy line, it was a movie universe, and the ambition of turning this into a movie universe where it felt like the movies weren't there yet, that I think was the factor that kills this iteration of films. Of course, by the time that 2014 comes around, the Avengers had already come out in 2012 and shown us just what you can do with a series of standalone films and then a team up film. And I remember that the big thing about The Amazing Spider Man 2 was how it was going to set up an entire universe of Spider Man villains and a Sinister Six movie and a Venom spinoff. And again, going into the whole grittiness of it, that you want to make it a little bit darker. You set up the Gwen Stacy death. Spoiler alert for a movie that's 15 years
Mhm,
old. Get over it. There's this Gwen Stacy death at the end of the movie that we can all see coming. It's not really a surprise. You're kind of just waiting for it. And
mhm,
everything that comes in between just feels under undercooked. Really,
mhm.
it's kind of like eating a hamburger before it's ready. You know, the texture's off and it tastes funky, and you're gonna come out feeling a lot worse than when you came in.
That's one of the best storylines in Spider-Man comic book history, and I think one thing that they did wrong was they put her in an outfit that was exactly like what Gwen Stacy's drawn where in that scene where she dies, and so before the movie even comes out, there's production photos of Emma Stone wearing that outfit, and everyone knows, "Oh my gosh, Gwen Stacy's gonna die in this movie."
Yeah,
Yeah.
worst kept
Oof.
secret. You know, fans knew it, so you're just watching this movie expecting the ending, which isn't really
Yeah.
a surprise, which isn't really a shock, and I think that really detracts from it. That's what happens, guys, when a movie comes out and before it even opens, there's 3 other sequels already on the schedule. Because if I remember correctly, and I was already working at box office when this came out, I think we had Amazing Spider-Man 3 and 4 already in the schedule
Mm,
in terms of
uh-huh.
upcoming releases. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Sinister Six, I know it had been announced, and they definitely talked about it at CinemaCon that year. I remember that distinctly. I think Sinister Six might have even had a release date. So by the
I
time
think
you
it
walk
did,
into Amazing Spider-Man 2, you're already thinking, who's gonna show up and who's not, and you're not really focused on what's happening in front of you.
Yeah. That was a lot of movies that they announced. The Silver and Black, the Olivia Wilde movie, the Drew Goddard Savage Land Sinister Six movies, the El Muerto movie with Bad Bunny.
Oh my goodness, I forgot. When has that been officially canceled yet? The Bad
Yeah,
Bunny and Muerto movie? Yeah. We'll get
yeah.
into everything that was, attempted and unrealized as Spider-Man spinoffs shortly. Because
Mm,
instead of Sony learning from the mistake of, hey, maybe people just want to watch a Spider-Man movie, maybe don't try to cram 15 sequels
mm.
into any given film, that still happens. even even when they're not producing Spider-Man movies themselves, unfortunately. And that leads us to the, maybe industry first. I'd never seen this before. If you asked me if this was ever going to happen at the time, I told you there's no chance. There's zero chance Sony ever gives up the production of these Spider-Man movies to anyone else. But that's precisely what happens. Spider-Man again needs to be retooled, needs to be relaunched, and a historic decision is made when Amy Pascal at Sony decides, you know what, Kevin Feige, go for it. You make it, we distribute it. Diogo, what's the backstory on this decision?
On the whole, ooh, okay, where to even begin? So basically, Sony saw the mistakes they made with Amazing Spider-Man and how every movie was making less money, and they knew that they had to do something. So they set up a meeting with Kevin Feige to see like what they could do. And Amy Pascal had him come over. They had gourmet sandwiches, and she thought that it was going to be more of a, oh, give us some tips on how to improve our universe. And he said, well, what if you just let us produce it instead? Because we're doing a pretty good job at it. And she got very angry and threw a sandwich at his head.
Yeah, that sounds about
That
right.
was my, yeah.
Yeah.
But she, yeah, eventually she, realized it would probably be the best decision. So they figured out a deal to how they could split Spider-Man. Spider-Man would come make some appearances in the MCU and get his own few movies, while Marvel Studios would produce for them and Sony would still distribute.
And that was a shaky deal, I think, for many years. It was very much a tentative, let's see how this goes. Ultimately, we can't call it anything but a resounding success, especially looking at what happened this weekend when Spider Man Brand New Day, the fourth standalone installment of this Marvel produced Spider Man franchise, ends up becoming the biggest opening weekend of all time, dethroning Avengers Endgame from the Disney Marvel library. It was the right decision. It wasn't easy to get to, but a lot of the mistakes that happened in the Amazing Spider-Man reboot for 2012 were avoided when the character is reintroduced. Not in a Spider-Man movie, Chad. Spider-Man is reintroduced in a Captain America sequel, in Captain America Civil War, a movie that comes out in 2016. I don't know how you guys felt about seeing this new Spider-Man for the first time, but as someone that has never really liked these Marvel movies, I think they were very lucky that Spider-Man is reintroduced in probably the best Marvel movie to have come out, period, in Civil War, and it works. I mean, they don't come in with the origin story. He already exists, and they just kinda throw him in there in a world where he doesn't have to carry the entire movie. He's there to just steal a scene, and boy, does he steal it. I thought it went really well. As a Spider-Man fan, Chad, how did you react to seeing him in Civil War?
I thought it was really refreshing because we were already in the giant Marvel Cinematic Universe. We knew all these other characters. It was a great time to put Spider-Man into the mix. And like you said, they finally learned we don't have to redo the origin story yet again. We can just toss him in with all these other heroes that you already know and love. And I think, yeah, it was really refreshing because in the comics, he interacts with a lot of these heroes over and over again, and now we finally get to have them in the same movie.
Yeah, I think it worked really, really well for me too. It doesn't have to get lost in the great power, great responsibility, Uncle Ben Oscorp storyline. That's another thing that I think they do very well in reintroducing him as a Marvel hero. We've already seen Norman Osborn twice in these movies. We've already seen the Uncle Ben thing twice in these movies. We've seen the radioactive spider twice in these movies. You don't need any of that. You can just have fun with it. And that's all that he needs to do in Civil War. We'll talk about Homecoming shortly, but Diogo, as a fan, how did that reintroduction work for you when you saw him in Captain America: Civil War?
Pure joy. I was so happy. I was just at the movies having a wonderful time. I was like, they did it. They figured it out. Everyone wins. His take on the character was perfect. The quips, the tones, everything just perfectly melded in there with Paul Rudd.
I do want to bring up a point here in terms of a criticism that I know I'm not the only one that has it in having Spider-Man being reintroduced in Civil War. In bringing him into this established world of the MCU, he does get a father figure in Tony Stark, in the Iron
Mhm.
Man character, which maybe isn't the way that I remember or liked Spider-Man. It's something different. I think it works with this iteration because Tom Holland plays Spider-Man as a teenager, and not like as a I'm about to commit to a D1 college teenager. It's I'm about to start JV football teenager, a very different sort of age range. And the father figure element, I think, is successful, but a lot of the romance that I have with a Spider-Man character, which is a kid from Queens that, can barely get by living in New York City, that is trying to like patch up his suit. All of that ends up turned into a Iron Man Jr. sort of character that has all the latest technology at his fingertips. So the character sort of changes dramatically, at least to what we get to see in Captain America Civil War. However, I think those concerns for me personally were quelled by the time we get to his first standalone film, Spider Man Homecoming, a movie that came out in July 2017, opened to $117 million domestically, and ended up topping out at $880 million globally. For reference sake, that is a back to success metric for this franchise. A lot of the decisions that John Watts takes in this Spider-Man movie as a filmmaker, I think are the right ones. And even though you feel like Mark Webb had something exciting going on and was never fully realized, I feel that John Watts, starting with his first one, got something very right in that it was less focused on having Spider Man try to be part of the MCU because it was already part of the MCU. You didn't have to try to become something else. It was part of it already. So we get a film that is, admittedly, by its own screenwriters, a high school film. It's a film that reminds you a lot of the John Hughes movies. It's called Homecoming for a couple of reasons. Of course, a homecoming of the iconic Marvel hero to the MCU at the movies. And it's also a homecoming in terms of that's the plot of the movie. It's a kid trying to go to a school dance, and also he's a superhero. In a universe where we've seen the Spider Man movie before, I hadn't seen this type of Spider Man movie. And that's what I think it gets right. Trying not to recreate the origin story, but also not rejecting everything that came before it. Instead, it puts the character in different settings. For the first time, I see a Spider Man movie, guys, where he's not in New York the entire time. There's a pretty fun rescue sequence in Washington, D.C. That gets extended even further in Spider Man Far From Home, quite literally. But I'm curious as to what your reactions were to Homecoming back in 2017. Diogo, where did you first see it? And at this point, are you in the bag for John Watts as director of the new Spider Man series?
Oh, I'm in it. That was 2017. I saw that here in LA. I think I saw it at the Vista here in Los Feliz, and I was immediately on board. They had won me over with Civil War. I love how everything they're doing it really is from the comics, like the Iron Spider, the technology advanced Peter that we have in these movies, like all exist in the comics from around the Civil War era. So I'm like, oh, we just moved everything around. So it's new in the movies and still familiar from the comics at the same time, which really worked for me. And I love Homecoming. I think it's my favorite of the MCU Spider-Man movies still, especially after rewatching them now.
Chad, where did you first see this movie and what were your first impressions?
So I saw this at the AMC Lincoln Square 13. They had just introduced IMAX with laser, I think at the end of 2016. So I was there opening weekend. I still have my little like Spider-Man figure that I got from seeing Homecoming opening weekend. Yeah, I thought it was really fun. We had already it was very smart that they introduced him in the MCU in an MCU movie so that you already knew this character, you kind of knew what this take on Spider-Man was gonna be. You got to know him, and then he gets his own, standalone. So I thought in that respect, it worked really well.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's also a movie that is anchored by characters, right? It's not really a Spider-Man movie, it's very much a Peter Parker movie. And that's great, and that's fun, and we end up creating bonds with a lot of the ensemble cast. The fact that he's in high school, you end up connecting with his classmates and teachers a lot to the point where when they come back in the John Watts sequels, they're very welcome. That's something that we hadn't seen before, right? Him having friends, because that's a huge part of us growing up in high school. Our friends, the girl you have a crush on, they get so much of those story beats right in developing the Peter Parker character. And I would even say, I think Watts does a better job than Raimi does in the regard that Peter Parker is fully realized in the Raimi films by his relationship to Aunt May and to MJ. Whereas in the Watson movies, you feel like he's part of a community. You know Aunt May, you know MJ, but you have other friends. You know, you also have the father figure with Tony Stark. He feels like much more of a person. And Tom Holland, which is just maybe the best casting, I think, in terms of Peter Parker Spider-Man combos. My Spider-Man is always going to be Tobey Maguire, but if I had to tell you right now who I think the best Spider-Man is out of all of them, my vote's on Tom Holland. I don't know how you guys feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very similarly like for nostalgic reasons, Toby, is always going to be Peter Parker, but I do think Tom Holland is a great Peter Parker, and I like that they cast him a lot younger. Of course, he, from Billy Elliot fame was coming in and able to bring a lot of the movement to the character as well. So yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we finally have a fourth standalone Spider-Man film, and I think Tom Holland is a big part of that.
I'll go on further. I think John Watts is also a big part of this.
Yes,
And
yeah.
maybe it's because I'm not a fan at all of Mark Webb's 500 Days of Summer, and that's what I came into when I watched The Amazing Spider-Man. I came into a movie where I wasn't a fan of the director's last film, which is a little bit unfair. I think Mark Webb does a lot of things that are impressive in both the Spider-Man movies. Ultimately, he's not a filmmaker that I've ever really connected to. John Watts' Cop Car is a fantastic movie. It's a really, really, really strong film. I highly recommend it. And to go from that to a standalone Spider-Man movie and to not only win everyone over, but to get your own trilogy of Spider-Man movies after that, I think is a testament to the work you do. I think he aces this assignment. The script is fortunately probably the strongest script I would say in the entire franchise. I think it establishes the hero, it establishes the world, it doesn't try to do too much. It feels like a self-contained story. What are the stakes? Ultimately, the stakes of the movie are I want to go to my school dance with my friends. And I happen to be a superhero. And making it a smaller story, especially with the backdrop of the MCU, I think makes the movie work extremely well. But I think it was really, really valuable before you have these, operatic, extraterrestrial, interdimensional Spider Man storylines that keep on happening in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The reboot to standalone movies is about a kid in high school going to a dance. That's what it pulls off. I still think it's in terms of rewatchability, for me, it's the one that works best. In terms of villain motivation, I think Michael Keaton's Vulture is great. And I think it's probably the most fleshed out comic book villain in the MCU, period. I don't know if you guys, maybe Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger is maybe a little bit better. I don't know how you guys feel in terms of
Yeah.
ranking here.
That's a tough call between the 2 of them. I just love how damage control was set up in this movie, and it made
Mhm.
everything else make sense, like, all the motivations for the villains, like, just that. It's like all of a sudden, like, boom, you got a Sinister Six ready to go right there.
And of course, after the release of Spider Man Homecoming, you get those aforementioned Avengers movies where Spider Man goes into space. It kind of dies, kind of doesn't die. I don't exactly know what the comic book term is to that snap dust thing. Who cares? I'm over it. And in the middle of all that, we also get a standalone Venom movie. I don't want to talk too much about Sony's Spider Man Villains Universe. Diogo, does that have like an official title? The Villain
It
Verse?
it has 2. It has the Sony Pictures universe of Marvel characters. That
Oh
is what
no,
they
that's a
sent it to
horrible
us.
name.
That's what they called it in emails. I liked it better what they call it on the internet, Sony's "Something to Do with Spider-Man, I Think" universe, which is a
Oh, that's
quote
good.
of yeah, a quote from the Vulture in Morbius.
That's that seems pretty accurate. Well, anyway, to get us back on track here, between Spider-Man Homecoming and the next standalone iteration of this franchise, Spider-Man Far From Home, is just 2 years' time. So July 2017, Homecoming, July 2019 for Far From Home. In those 2 years, guys, we had four Spider-Man associated films: Infinity War in April 2018, Venom in October 2018, the animated Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in December 2018, which we're not going to get too much into these animated movies. I just want to put out there that might be the best Spider-Man movie ever made, and maybe alongside The Dark Knight, the best superhero movie ever made. I'm a big fan.
That's my
And then
number
you also,
one.
yeah, that's how
That
good they are.
I'll put it in my number one right now. Best superhero movie, period, Into the Spider-Verse.
They deserve their own episode, so we're not going to lose
Yeah.
too much time going into these Spider Verse movies. But anyway, they're highly recommended. And of course, the fourth film to come in between Homecoming and Far From Home, involved in the Spider Man milieu, is Avengers Endgame in April 2019. That's a lot of Spider Man, guys. Basically, in 2 years, six total Spider-Man related big screen studio movies. And the franchise is firing in all cylinders at this point. John Watts comes back for Spider-Man Far From Home. I saw this at the Alamo Draft House, Brooklyn. $95 million opening weekend, the first $1 billion standalone Spider-Man movie. Domestically, it makes 390 million, and overseas it takes off with $741 million. I had a great time with it. Again, we talk about Spider-Man, we talk about movies that remind us of other films. Really smart move in saying, hey, let's take them to Europe. Let's go to Venice and shoot there. I interviewed John Watts for this movie for our magazine, and he said that's one of the first things he wanted to do: get out of a set, go shoot on location. He had a great time shooting in Venice. And the movie, I think does a lot right, has a lot of fun. I think the Mysterio of it all with Jake Gyllenhaal is a wonderful piece of it. Again, one of the stronger villains, in my opinion. Chad, where did you see this and what were your thoughts?
I saw this one also at the AMC Lincoln Square 13 in IMAX, and I think of all of the Holland films, this is probably the one that I like the least, but again, like, Jake Gyllenhaal's great in it, it's a great villain, it's fun, it does something different than we've seen before.
Diego, on your end, you remember where you saw this?
Yeah, I saw that at the AMC Burbank here in LA, and again, I just had a wonderful time. Like, these all just hit so right for me. I wish it was called Night Monkey, the movie, but other than that, like, yeah, it was just more
And there's
fun.
a
I just feel like, maybe it's because they got the Vacation reboot writers that I feel like I'm watching the Vacation movies again. Like, the first one, it's like a domestic road trip, the second one's the Euro trip, and the third one's the Christmas one. It's it's all there, man. I see what they're doing.
They're all lighter in tone. And again, it still feels like a high school movie. I think the next one, No Way Home, is the one that really departs from that high school movie formula. But here, a lot of that charm is still there. I agree with you, Chad. It might be, maybe it doesn't have the heights that Homecoming had, and it doesn't have that, momentous occasion that No Way Home ultimately ends up bringing, or, the records that Brand New Day delivers. It's kind of awkward. It's the quiet movie awkwardly sandwiched in between. But like Diogo mentions, it does feel like a little vacation because it puts you in a completely new setting with the character. It does away with the entire secret identity thing. That was a big part of this MCU take on the Spider-Man character. They don't want to deal with secret identities. They don't, make that an issue at all. So yes, it's a transitional movie in terms of what the MCU is building as a standalone film. I still think it stands on its own. Ultimately, we talk about it in the context of setting up maybe the first big movie moment in the post-pandemic era for exhibition in December 2021, and becoming the first cultural moment where audiences really come back to the movies after those pandemic closures in 2020. A movie that will always have a very special place in my heart just because of what it meant in terms of the viability of our industry in a critical time. And it doesn't hurt that the movie's also really, really good. This is probably the movie that had the most hype going into it. The multiverse had already been, rumored to be part of Spider-Man No Way Home in 2021, but I don't know exactly how much was confirmed. Do you remember that, Chad, going into the movie? Because that was a big part of the marketing narrative that, like, hey, there's going to be villains and maybe there's going to be some surprises.
Yeah, because there's a shot in that initial trailer, right, where it's in the film is actually all 3 of them, but they digitally removed,
Mhm.
Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, but I think there was a lot of, like yeah, I can't quite remember when they revealed that.
I remember in the marketing buildup, there was a lot made with the villains coming back. We didn't know who exactly would be coming back, but the Green Goblin laugh at the end of the first
Right.
teaser trailer is something I'll never forget. We were actually shown that trailer for the first time at that CinemaCon in 2021. That was the like diehards only CinemaCon where the pandemic was still going around, and it was just the people really, really, really into this industry that showed up to Vegas that year. We saw that trailer for the first time at the Coliseum. It ends up hitting the internet that night, ends up scoring like records for the most viewed trailer of all time. Trailers that ends up getting broken by Spider-Man Brand New Day, actually, earlier this year. And I remember before it comes out, knowing that all of these rumors are swirling around, that you're going to introduce these villains and that maybe other Spider-Mans are going to be in it, going into it being very concerned. Hey, we're getting to a Spider-Man 3 again, and if we remember the last time we had a Spider-Man 3, they just stuck all these villains that made no sense. It was bloated. And the last time we had a Amazing Spider-Man sequel, they made the same mistakes. I came into it with a lot of trepidation. Ultimately, however, those concerns were unwarranted because the movie ends up delivering for audiences, period. Diogo, where were you when this movie comes out, and what was your impression of Spider-Man No Way Home in December of
Ooh.
2021?
Oh, I was hyped for this one. Man, I was sitting in the front row of the AMC Americana IMAX in my recliner seat there, just staring up at it, and it was my number 3 best movie-going experience I've ever had.
All
Uh,
right, let's count these down. So you have Cats as number 1,
Cats number 1,
Spider-Man 2 is number 2, and you have No
Spider-Man
Way Home as
3
number
is
3.
number 2, yeah, yeah, and,
Okay,
No Way Home number 3.
wonderful.
Uh, yeah, it was just like the energy in that cinema was like nothing I've ever felt before. Like, everyone was so excited for this movie, and we didn't know yet if, like, the Toby and the Andrews were gonna be in it that were so heavily rumored, and I just remember, like, that cane coming in front for when Daredevil steps up, like, everyone collectively losing their mind at that one beat. I was like, "Yes, I am with my people. We're in the church of Daredevil right now. This is great." And
No, and
I just remember sitting there crying in the front row and everyone, like, around me just hyped throughout so many parts of that movie.
I saw this at the press screening at the AMC Lincoln Square, not at the IMAX where Chad saw the prior 2 films in this franchise. I saw this at the Dolby Auditorium, the Dolby Cinema they have there. And I can tell you it's probably the most fan-centric press screening I've ever attended in my career, where it feels like you're there with a paying audience. I've never had that experience at a press screening before or since. A really good memory that I have from it. And as I was saying, I think a lot of those concerns of, is this going to make the same mistakes, be bloated, too many storylines, too many villains, too many characters. There's a bunch of villains. There's a bunch of characters, a bunch of storylines. But Chad, what is it about this movie where it all kind of works and settles into a very entertaining 2.5 hours?
Yeah, I think, the multiverses in phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is kinda all over the place, but I feel like this is the one movie where they got the multiverse right and bringing back the prior 2 Spider-Man, and it's just fun. It was very nostalgic because, I mean, I'm sure you guys feel the same way. It's like we've been on the journey with these previous Spider-Men and, it's also introducing them to kind of the next generation, and so I kind of have all 3 generations of them come together was really cool.
I have
Yeah,
to give a special shout out to Tobey Maguire, who, after all the years after playing Spider-Man, I don't know how long he had to hit the gym to fit back into one of those spandex suits. It's not easy after 35 to go
Mhm,
back
mhm,
and fit
mhm.
into clothes that
Yes,
you could fit in your
much
20s.
respect.
It like I would just be humiliated in even attempting that. So that's a very brave commitment
Yeah,
from Tobey
I
Maguire. And of
very
course,
agree.
the Andrew Garfield of it all was great. I loved having the three
Mhm.
of them back. The villains, which again, not all the villains were villains that I was completely convinced by, I think work in this movie.
Mhm.
And Willem Dafoe, man, I mean, he's the Green Goblin. Don't recast that character. Don't give me another
Yeah.
take on the
Yeah.
Green Goblin. He was wonderful in this. The decision to tweak the origin story and the Uncle Ben, great power, great responsibility line works perfectly here with Aunt May. And
Yeah.
that was unexpected, right? So,
Mhm.
whereas in The Amazing Spider Man 2, the big unexpected death scene, we all kind of saw coming from a mile away. Was it a surprise to you the way it was for me, Diogo, when Aunt May doesn't make it out of Spider-Man: No Way
Yeah.
Home?
That was absolutely perfect the way they did it. And like to think like, wow, we have a Spider-Man origin story with no Uncle Ben. We can just and it
Uh,
still works. And it I think this movie just shows that there's no real shortcuts. The multiverse worked in this one because it was in service of this movie and the work had been done. We had established these characters. We've like seen them in all the previous ones, so we can bring them into this one now instead of being like, "Oh, look at all these new things that you've never heard of and are maybe not familiar with." Just go do the
Mhm.
work.
And the repercussions of the multiverse were contained within the dramatic stakes of this film, not
Yeah.
in service of setting up a sequel. And I think that's
right.
important. So the multiverse makes sense in terms of what gets resolved at the end of this movie. And that's what drives me crazy about the multiverse era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It feels like
Yeah.
there's so much homework you have to do. You don't know half the characters and you just got lost in it to the point that you don't care. That doesn't happen with No Way Home. I agree with you that it's the most effective way to do the multiverse.
There's one thing that they set up for future movies in this movie that did not work out, and of course, it was Venom after the credits.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
The
that's
one
the big
thing
aspect.
was the Sony something to do with Spider-Man, I think, universe, where in Venom 3, it just starts with him. They, like, contain the little Venom thing, and it moves away, and it's Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's in the multiverse already. He's in the Doctor Strange movies, and we got a Venom 3 that has also Reese Ifans in it as not the Lizard, who's also in a
Right.
Spider-Man movie. I was just screaming watching this movie. I was like, what are you doing to me?"
And unfortunately, that's the worst part of this era of Spider-Man. It's not the MCU Spider-Man movies that Sony's putting out. It's the Spider-Man movies that don't have Spider-Man in them that Sony is putting out. And we say this because between the release of Spider-Man No Way Home and the latest Spider-Man title to hit theaters, Spider-Man Brand New Day, there was a total of, count them, yes, 5 Spider-Man associated films to have come out, and only one of them is worth your time. One in the Spider Verse, you had Morbius in 2022 that, yeah, didn't do too well in terms of financial performance or reputation. Across the Spider Verse, the exception here in 2023, did well, but was the last time we really ever saw much of anything from the animated Spider Verse until next summer. Madam Web in 2024, a film that has been made fun of on the internet since the second it came out. Venom: The Last Dance in 2024, a movie that I forgot existed, and J.C. Chandor's Craven the Hunter in 2024 after multiple delays. I don't know how you guys feel about these movies, these Spider-Man villain movies, but having just rattled off these 4 titles between No Way Home and Brand New Day, it seems to me they just kinda dumped all of them out there for us to kind of forget about.
I'll break them all down for you. Venom, I think, is insane. There's just so much in that movie that it's like wonderful car wreck for me. I was like, this isn't working, but it is working. You can make a drinking game of how many times they pass by the Rialto Theater in San Francisco in like the big climax of the movie. It's a crazy thing to see. So yeah, there's something good about Venom in there. Just Tom Hardy's performance really worked.
It's still hard to believe that Venom has its own trilogy of movies that a lot of
Yeah,
people saw and no one really remembers. They
yeah.
seem very disposable, which is at least better than anything we could say about Madam Web, Morbius, or Craven the Hunter.
Oh man, Craven, I know I saw that movie, but like
You have
it
a
it
ticket
was
stub somewhere,
it
but
just
you don't
went
retain
through me.
anything.
I saw it. I know I saw it at the Americana, but it was just like, okay, I guess that happened.
No, guys,
Aaron,
I saw like the first 15 minutes at Cine Europe, like a year and a half before it got released. I couldn't tell you anything about
yeah,
that footage. Just it
there
came and
was,
went in the night.
yeah,
Nobody knows that movie exists. You could
it,
market it and release it next year, and you could fool me that
yeah,
it's a new movie.
yeah. It was pretty nonsensical. And Madam Web, absolute madness. It's one of those ones. I was like, this was so bad that you kind of have to see it just to experience it.
Yeah, we won't get too lost in those movies. If you saw them and liked them, good for you and your
Yeah.
life choices. We won't waste any more of your time talking about any of them because we are closing this episode with our discussion of Spider Man Brand New Day, the movie
Yeah.
that is now the biggest domestic opening weekend of all time, having opened to $360 million. The title surpassed the $1 billion global benchmark in just 6 days. That is the second fastest a film has ever reached that benchmark. It is also the film that has got into the $400 million benchmark at the domestic box office the quickest, doing so in only 4 days in release. Guys, records left and right for this movie. I went to go see it on ScreenX and 3D over at the Regal Union Square, which ended up being the movie theater that I've seen most of these Spider-Mans in. What did you guys think? Because I mean, I've got my own thoughts here. I do expect the title to suffer a little bit of a bigger decrease than maybe we would be used to, just because it's a maybe the first Spider-Man standalone title that does more MCU lifting than any other movie, and I think it suffers from it. But ultimately, I think it's still a pretty good picture. Chad, what were your first impressions of the movie?
Yeah, I think the MCU of it all does get in the way a little bit, but I think it's a really fun popcorn movie. I think it's probably my second favorite of all of the Tom Holland Spider-Man films, the standalones, and yeah, I think it does a lot of things well. I love that it's picking up on all of the emotional threads of No Way Home and that it's not trying to go bigger, it's just focusing more on the fallout of that.
Yeah, Diogo, are you in the same page here, or are you a lot more in the bag than both Chad and I were? I mean, to be fair, I think Chad and I are both saying the first 2 hours are a great time. I think as long as you have those dramatic stakes between Zendaya's Mary Jane and Tom Holland's Spider Man, the movie works really well. But the last 35, 40 minutes, when it becomes a commercial for Avengers Doomsday, I kept on looking at my watch. I don't know if that worked for you.
Oh, I was thinking the end of it was more of a commercial for whatever mutant X-Men thing is to come
I'm
rather than
assuming that's
Doomsday, yeah.
Doomsday, so it might not even be a
Um,
commercial for the next
yeah,
Avengers. It might be
I
a
don't even
commercial for
know.
a movie that doesn't exist yet. Because that's what
Yeah,
it
I
felt
was
like, and that really let me down out of this one, because the John
mm,
Watts movies never really had to do that. They felt self-contained in a way that this feels like franchise exposition rather
mm,
than a true self-contained film. I will say again, the real self-contained film is a movie that doesn't involve the Hulk, the Punisher, or whatever happened in the last act, and it's probably a
mm,
good 100 minutes of running time. But there's a whole
yeah.
other movie tacked onto this.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I'm curious to see how I'm gonna feel after a second watching because I think I'm gonna probably enjoy it more. I was a little bit in my head for a lot of this one, where the other ones were so easy to enjoy and just, like, let the comedy take you. And this I'm like, "Oh, he's sad again. Let's see what's
Yeah,
going on."
sad brooding Spider-Man we hadn't really seen since, the Andrew Garfield sequel.
Yeah.
I didn't miss him, and I'm not really clamoring to see sad brooding Spider-Man ever again, really. And I say this as
Yeah.
someone that generally liked the film. I think
Mhm.
having Peter Parker be alone. And that's a wonderful conversation that Chad Kennerk had with Destin Daniel Trayton, you can find in last week's episode
Mhm.
of the podcast, where the director tells Chad that was the whole point of this movie, having him in a situation where he doesn't have his home base, he doesn't have his community around him. That was great. Focus on that. But as soon as you throw the Hulk in there, and as soon as you're trying to like shoehorn the Punisher in as many scenes as you can, that's when it starts waning. I think the film does suffer that there's no real natural villain to it because once Mary Jane gets written out of the last act of the film just kind of flails around. Chad, I don't know if that's how you felt going into the last half hour.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think some of the MCU stuff, like I was saying, it gets in the way, and it is setting up. There was some news that came out this week that Samara Weaving was cast as Emma Frost for an X-Men movie, so there's some building there towards something. I think it poses some interesting conversations about the whole control aspect with the inhibitor chip and that whole kind of
Mhm.
storyline that could be interesting later on.
But
But
that's
yeah,
a problem, Chad. That's a
yeah.
that's a plot point for a movie that doesn't exist yet. It might not even be a plot point for Doomsday. It might be a plot point for a movie that might get written in the next year, or it might not, as we've seen from some of these post-credit sequences. And that's when the MCU, I think, fails us as audience members. When you start feeling the weight of having to sustain this momentum of TV shows and movies and heroes and side characters, and yeah, you end up having a 2 hour, what is it, like 2 hours, 40 minutes of a film that really ends at the 2 hour mark. The story you need
Hmm.
ends by the time you resolve the Mary Jane Peter situation, if at all. After that, there's no emotional stakes whatsoever in the movie. It's all just exposition for things that might come next or might not come at all. And if they do come, it's probably going to be at least 2 years from now.
I think they've been building damage control as the bad guys in this franchise and also in like the rest of the MCU for so long that it felt more natural to me. Like, oh, yes, they have arrived now as the big bad at the end of the movie. So I wasn't so distracted. I do have to give people a warning like, this is the movie's good, but it is a sad Spider-Man movie. And I have had some people react to that kind of like, oh, I don't want another sad Spider-Man movie.
Yeah.
So I
No,
totally
that's a
see
good
how
point.
that might cause a drop.
We're expecting a week two from the title to fall between 150 to 160 million dollars, followed by a number two performance from the Odyssey between 25 and 35 million dollars. And in number three, a very welcome counter programmer will be One Night Only, currently expected to open between 7 and 10 million dollars, playing an important role in the marketplace to diversify the movies that are currently out there. You don't want to see a Odyssey. You don't want to see a Spider-Man. That's fine. There's a romantic comedy out there for you. And Chad Kennerk interviews the director Will Gluck of One Night Only coming up right after this break. Before then, a big thank you to everyone listening to this supersized episode of the Box Office Podcast. We'll be back next week with a significantly shorter take on the industry. And to Chad Kennerk and Diego Hausen, thank you so much for joining us. And now, without any further ado, Will Gluck, director of One Night Only, speaking to Chad Kennerk after this break.
I think exhibitors are still pointing to Anyone But You as the example of why romance, why comedy play an important role, not just commercially, but socially. Why do you think that the genre has been saddled to streaming in recent years?
Something has beget. So I think they started putting rom-coms on streaming, which was fine during COVID and beforehand. And then people started getting used to them being on streaming. And then it became rom-coms are on streaming.
Yeah.
People always say like, this is a box office magazine, right? So people always say rom-coms are dead. I'm like, rom-coms are very not dead.
No.
There are probably more, no one's done a study, but there's probably more rom-coms now than there were 10 years ago.
Mhm.
They're at home, so people don't think they're movies.
Right.
So that's the thing we've been fighting about. And I always, whenever I do screenings, I ask people like, well, where would you see this? And it's almost streaming. And my favorite was, I said, why? I was asking why. Because it's free. I'm like, it's not free. Do you understand?
No.
It's
No.
free, but it is free in your head because you don't have to pay anything extra.
How much better to be distraction free in the environment of a theater. I think people want to laugh together. They want to be swept away in a crowd. Movies are a great date night.
Yes. So my theory is for this. Okay, so we're not competing against other movies at the box office, our movies. We're competing against standing in line to Gilbert and Soho. We're competing against a group because that's become the group experience now.
Mhm.
The group experience is standing in line for a slice of pizza, standing in line for a new drop. It's supreme. So why do people like standing in line? thing a lot thinking about this. It's not to get the yogurt. The yogurt's shitty. It's to stand in line with your friends
Yeah.
and pictures and have fun and ultimately take a picture of it. Well, so for us, a movie now is I think is a 6 hour journey, 2 hours to talk about tickets, get your friends, go to the theater, stand in line, watch the movie, then go home, talk about it. So what do you need to spend 6 hours doing? The movies I make, what I believe in this movie and the last movie is fun. It's fun. It's fun. You're going to have fun with other people. You're going to have fun laughing. You're going to be fun singing. You're going to be fun talking about it. It's not a homework assignment. It's a fun thing to do for 6 hours. And that to me, I think people always say, what's been theatrical over the last 5 years since COVID? All those movies can turn to that. There's, I mean, some specific ones, but even Odyssey is a fun, I mean, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's a fun thing. So like, that's what I try to do.
Well, it definitely shows all throughout every moment of this film. And technology has made it harder, I think, in some ways to make a romantic comedy, to pull it off well. One not only takes all of those elements of digital dating and gives it a reason to happen in real life. How did you approach keeping it so relatable?
It's if you take everything on this thing and you put it in real life, it's like, how are you going to act? How you, and the thing about romantic comedies or comedies in general is that most that they all kind of usually hinge on a misunderstanding or a conceit or something that's crazy that could have been, a trope that could have been cleared up. When in this movie, the entire country is under the same conceit. So everyone out in the city where you live in is doing the same thing. You don't have to question the choices you make.
Yeah.
It's very hard in romantic movies when you have two people that you want ultimately to get together when they decide to go with someone else. Almost always like, what are you doing? But in this, of course you're going to go with someone else. You have 12 hours.
Right, right.
Of course she's going off of that one. Of course she's going off there. Like there's no question of what they're doing, which to me takes a little of the pressure out of the, "Well, come on, what are they doing?" Because
Yeah,
this
yeah,
movie,
yeah.
like when you first meet these two in the beginning, they don't need to be with each other. They can be with anybody. They just need somebody. So that's the kind of method of getting rid of all that and just kind of making the every plot decision they make is understandable.
And it's so easy to buy into it because we've all been through COVID. We've all been through something that we didn't expect. Everything shut down. You don't have a choice.
Right. That was, I mean, there's a reason why I put this movie 3 years after this thing was passed. I
Mm,
didn't want it to
mhm.
just, I don't want it I don't want to, maybe that's the prequel, but I want to talk about like how it happened. It's just like, okay, we agree with it. We don't agree with it. We're human beings. This is what it is for right now. How are we going to react? And the world's in the background. Like you saw the movie, like all the stuff is in the background of the world. It's there, but that's not what we're talking about.
John Hughes was a big inspiration for you. How surreal was it to work with Molly Ringwald?
Yeah, amazing, incredible. She like the second day we were shooting, or the third day, we shot in night sites. We shot all nights in this movie, and every time we it's all night long. Is she took me aside and said, I haven't worked this way that you're working since I did John Hughes movies. And I was
Mm.
like, oh my God. Like it was like the phrase, but you gotta be, oh my God, Mom, like I give her a big hug. Like, you don't know how much that means to me. It's still this day, it's incredible. The funny thing about that is that, and it was at that moment when the costumer came on and had to wrap her in bubble wrap. I was like, no, I hope I'm not desecrating the memory, but and then that last scene of her was in bubble wrap. 5 in the morning.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like Hughes, you have a real knack for working with actors as they're on the cusp, as they're about to become even bigger movie stars. What was it about the pairing of Monica and Callum that sparked for you?
Like what you said, that people have heard of them, but not really. They don't they can become when you're doing a romantic comedy, you have to wanna hang out with these people together,
Mm, mm,
right? So, I met with Callum for many long, met with Monica a lot, got to know them personally, and then put them together, and then you it's very interesting is when you put them together, is do I wanna watch them hang out with each other? And the
mm.
only way we wanna watch someone hang out with each other if they enjoy hanging out with each other.
Right.
And we all have rehearsals, and then very early on, it was like, you can tell when you're rehearsing or something and there's a break and no one goes anywhere. Because when you make a movie like this, there's 3 people have to kind of fall in love with each other for 3 months and really just get and we're lucky enough and they're incredible actors and they're even better people. So it's
Mm.
like the line between hanging out and actually filming is got kinda gone.
Now, you mentioned the way that you work. Was there a moment or an alt that didn't make the final cut?
Oh my god, there's like 6 billion.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I mean, yeah, I try so many different things all the time. I mean, even that thing with Molly and LeVar Burton, there's a whole thing. I was gonna do a flashback later on when they're in the pizza place and they asked each other, "Why didn't you go out with him?" "Yeah, it didn't work out." "What about him?" "Didn't work out." I was gonna flash to different back, and so I shot this thing of Molly and LeVar wrapped completely, duct taped, like duct tape it like a spider. So we had this big spider with duct tape it like this, and like LeVar runs and like jumps. So that was like at 5 in the morning. Took like 4 hours to shoot, and
Oh my gosh.
yeah. And there are these moments when you're shooting that stuff like that in the back of your head where you think it's probably not going to make it, but sometimes it makes it.
Yeah, you never know, right? It's great to have all those.
Well, the song, the anyone but you, that song that I did at the very end when I made everyone sing it after every scene. Everyone was like, "It's never going to be in. It's never going to be in." I said, and halfway through, I said, "You're probably right. We had to keep doing it." And then in editing, it's like, "Oh, it's going to be in." So you never know. Yeah.
This is such a New York movie. There's a character about the city itself that, you can't replicate that in Toronto. What was your shoot like?
I'm from New York. I love making movies in New York City. I love shooting in places that I grew up in, literally. So we don't, whenever I've done a couple in New York. I try not to do landmarks that tourists go to. So much of New York City people don't realize is what it is. So
Right.
we shot in 4 out of the 5 boroughs and little different places. There's something about shooting in New York. I love shooting in New York because no one cares, right? Everyone just walks through and you get the energy and it's great. But when you shoot in New York City at nighttime, which is what we did in this movie, by 2 or 3 in the morning, the city just kind of slows and quiets,
Mm,
and you feel like you're behind the scenes in a place you shouldn't be, and
mm.
it just feels like you own the streets, you own this closed restaurant, you own, Soho. There's no one there. And everyone starts to relax. It feels much more comfortable because it's just you. And that feeling is what I wanted on the screen. Because in this movie, at 2 in the morning when they go to his pizza place, that's the feeling. Like it's a really cool feeling, I think, going to behind a place that normally is bustling of thousands of people and you have it by yourself. They have the city by themselves. That's the way we felt filming. I felt filming anyway. And I think that's the way the characters felt in the movie when they were running down the mannequins, like it's by them. There's no one there. It's just them.
You can tell that you're from New York because you capture a certain like essence that I think only those that have lived in the city will understand. Not that it's not relatable to everyone, but there is that little something extra there,
I'm also obsessed with making sure that everywhere we go is geographically accurate.
which I appreciate. Yeah.
So many times, they're like, why are you doing this? Because there's no way he's got to get in this. There's a quick scene, it's about 3 seconds long in this movie that after Callum leaves Monica's apartment, has to go back uptown. I have a into it's like at the 5 minutes left in the movie. I have a quick shot of him on the subway, and everyone's like, Why do you care how he got there?" I care because you can't walk out of Soho and then walk to Washington. Can't do it. So I'm the only one that cares, but whatever.
Well, it's much appreciated because there's so many of those movies, in New York where they're going completely across town.
Exactly, and you're going the wrong direction. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of like the subway, the product placement in this movie is so fun. Your team had a lot of fun identifying like what would marketing and advertising look like in this world.
There's so much stuff in this movie, and I will say, a lot of movies get, they get, "Oh, so much money, product placement," and no one's given money for this movie. So, like, it's quite the opposite. Like, we had to beg brands to let us, change the branding. So, no money has changed hands. So, and it's really fun to do which brands would let us, and we were surprised. Like, Duolingo surprised us that they were letting us do it.
I want to watch it again so I can catch even more of those.
And it was really fun, actually. And there's tons of other signage. If you see this movie a couple times, there's so much stuff like in the deep background. We're very happy with the production design. How every time we got to a location, we had a whole van, literally a van of stuff that they would just go and we would just sticker the hell out and post and re-put the sock and then quickly taken down before the police came.
Yeah, and I think, we've all experienced all of that material on one level or another, so it totally makes sense for the world building. It's all right there. You don't have to, like you said, go into any backstory or anything.
No, that's what it would be, right? Like on New Year's Eve, all that stuff is there. So yeah.
There's so many great Easter eggs in this movie, including some nods to your previous work. But I was curious, the very end, what's the story behind
Which one's that?
the Easter egg at the very end of the
Oh, that sound.
credits?
You got all the way there?
It's like a sound, and I was trying to I
At the end of every single one of my movies, and that's is that sound. You're the first person to ever notice it because that's at the bitter end. There's two things. There's that, and so that sound is at the end of every single my movie since the start of me making movies. And then there's another cool thing at the credits. I don't know if you noticed this, but it said "Thank you for coming"
yes,
and
the pizza.
the pizza.
Yeah, I love
No,
that too.
yeah.
Yeah. So what's the origin of that sound?
The first movie I made, we had the same sound mixers at Sony, like the great sound mix. The first movie I ever made, we did a lot of ADR on the sound, the mix stage. I think at the end of one of them, I was like, someone said that's funny. I said, "Let's stick it in," and that's how it happened. And that's fine now. Every time I mix a movie, that people are like, "Yeah, we got it. We have it. It's ready to
Oh,
go."
I love that.
Sling Blade. Remember Sling Blade?
Yes,
It's kind of like
definitely. Seeing Breaking Away was a big theatrical experience for you. I'm curious, what's a rom-com or date movie that was a memorable moment?
it's a good question. I mean, I think the John Hughes movies for sure. I mean, honestly, it's a terrible answer, but Ferris's relationship with Sloane in that movie was
Mm.
yeah, I think it'd be that one. It's the craziest rom com to say, but there were Ferris's Sloane's relationship. I thought was great. I also love that movie so much because you think it's about Ferris, and it's not about that movie's not about Ferris. But if you really have a relationship, that rom com with Ferris and Cameron really